Ellis Amdur is a name that should be familiar to most Aikido practitioners, at least the ones who felt the urge to delve a little bit deeper into what it is we're actually practicing. His books, Dueling with O-Sensei and Hidden in Plain Sight, offer a candid perspective of a modern martial artist in search of truth, and he pulls no punches in generously sharing with us the wisdom he's gleaned on that journey. He's also a distinguished expert in the field of crisis intervention, published many books, both fiction and non, and offers an online course on verbal de-escalation of aggression. All of his many links with some additional details can be found at my Substack, keytothecity.substack.com. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the episode.
I started Aikido in, I think, 1973. I was training at the New Haven Aikikai, commuting every weekend down to New York. I was in college, and for 2 years, every weekend I'd drive down to New York, and I'd train at the Bond Street Dojo and the New York Aikikai. That's where you
Which is both of my, I trained at both of those dojos.
Yeah. So I was doing that for 2 years. I graduated college, moved to New York, and was living south of Houston on McDougal Street for a while. And then I moved into the Bond Street Dojo, and I lived there for, I think, about 6-8 months, just sleeping on the mat. Then I went to Japan, and I was training probably 6-7 hours a day. When I went to Japan, I was doing the same thing. My central place was the Kuwamori Dojo. It's a small dojo in northwest Tokyo. And that was my home dojo. I'd also go to the Homba Dojo. And then I was also going to other people's dojos as well. I'd go to the Kobayashi Dojo, Kobayashi Yaso. I would go to Kuriwa Sensei's dojo. So I was crazy about it. At the same time, I was in Japan about 2-3 months, and when I started doing Arakiryu, Arakiryu it's basically what foot soldiers in the 16th century would have done. It's very brutal. There's a lot of weapons, but the easiest way to explain it is it's like sumo with a weapon in your hand. A lot of hard contact.
And not to interrupt, but did you mention that O-Sensei also trained that for a little while when he was younger?
No, he never trained that.
You said, but I heard you in an interview say he trained in like a grappling style.
He trained in Yagyu Shinganyu.
Okay. Sorry, I got them mixed up.
That's okay. And Yagyu Shinganyu can be seen. There's several factions. The faction that he studied that probably is most similar to what he did goes by the name Arakido, Arakido. That's one.
Okay, that's why I thought it sounded sounds similar.
Yeah. So I started doing Arakido. Very, in many ways, antithetical to Aikido. I also started doing Tenshin Bukoryu, which is a school with very different parameters. It focuses around the Naginata. And I guess the easiest way that I can explain it is, imagine that Arakiryu is the embodiment of the way a wolverine handles itself in life.
Mm-hmm.
It's very aggressive, but will back up in a hollow log, so all you're facing is teeth. It's going to piss on the kill, so the wolves can't eat it. It's all for itself. It has that low to the ground intensity. Bukoryu is like an eagle. It's very spacious. Movements are very big. It's very fierce, but it's always on the outside. So very different parameters. So I was really obsessed with this stuff. And the Aikido I was doing, I started to have questions about its efficacy. And there was something I'd been looking for in Aikido that I'd heard about, and I wasn't finding. There were brilliant teachers, Nishio Shoji, for example, Kuriwa Sensei, people far above me in level. I'm not denigrating them. But Aikido itself was not something I wanted to train. So, I started doing, my main focus was those two Koryu. I trained in Muay Thai for a few years, kickboxing. I trained in judo. I used to do Chinese martial arts, all this sort of thing. I came back to, I've always been interested in Aikido because it was such a remarkable cultural phenomenon, sort of emerging from a mess of right-wing ideology and messianic salvationist grandiosity, all framed in a martial art. And it sort of encapsulated a historical period of Japan, all the craziness of that period. And so I've always been fascinated by it. And just, it was the first martial art I really, well, the second martial art I trained in intensity. Before that, I used to train in Kung Fu Wushu, which still exists up on 36th Street.
Oh, yeah.
Oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name. My teacher was George H.X. Alan Lee. Alan Lee was the headmaster of that school.
Can I just put a pin in it real quick? And going back to what you said about the milieu that Aikido came up in culturally, and you mentioned a right wing ideology briefly.
Mm-hmm.
Is if I don't want to go like open up a whole can of worms, because recently I got into like a little bit of a Facebook argument / discussion about like O-sensei's right-wing politics, and somebody who I was talking to went so far as to call him a fascist terrorist.
Well, I wasn't a terrorist.
And I've been doing my fair share of research about Omoto and that time period that they came up in. And as much as I don't want to say they weren't right wing, I feel like there was also, like, it's hard for us now as living in our modern times, like in our Western civilization countries, to look at a country like Japan and people who wanted to maintain their isolation. It's a little different than us, because like we colonized this place and then we want to be isolationist. They lived there for like thousands of years and wanted to be isolationist. So I think it's a little bit unfair to view them the same way we view ourselves through isolationism. I don't want to, like, we don't have to go too far into that, but.
Okay, so first of all, the terms right wing and left wing are so misused. For example, the term right wing was originally a communist term to in Soviet Russia to describe communists who weren't sufficiently committed to collectivization. They were right-wing deviationists. Nazism was an aberration of socialism.
Right, yeah, because it was this socialist,
National socialism.
Right, it's in their name.
So basically what the National Socialists did is they essentially said that collectivization, if you will, was under the aegis of a national polity. And the best custodian of that polity was the state itself, which is the embodiment of the people. So they took the dictatorship of the proletariat, took it one step further and said the state itself manages everyone. Everyone is in a sense like an ant hive, an individual organism of the state, which is its own entity. And so the state took collectivization a step further and made a corporate collectivization. Okay, all that means is the state and the corporations merge.
Right.
And so then we get Japan, and we use the term uryoku, or right wing, but there were two right wings. The one right wing, which won, and in a sense were the controllers of what became World War II, were very much like the Nazis in the sense that, or the Italian fascists, in that they were corporate utilitarians. The best way for our country to survive is to merge production and the state and conquer new territories and feed off those territories for the benefit of the state.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. Now, simultaneous to that, were what could be called the idealistic right wing,
Right.
who truly believed that Japan was a spiritual entity. And when I use the word spiritual, I don't mean, kumbaya.
That the gods were directly communicating with the emperor, right?
Right, well, not more than communicating. The god, in a sense, was the emperor was, in a sense, a god. But we have to understand that what God meant to the Japanese was a nexus of power. So a stone can be kami, right? It's and you look at a certain tree. So and they talk specifically about, and this is the terms they use: the war between the yellow race and the white race. Okay, so that was the way it was thought at that time. Now, I was having a conversation, and this is going to disgust a lot of people, but fair enough. I was having a conversation with a very right-wing individual in Japan who was of the idealistic viewpoint. And I said, well, if you guys were trying to save Asia, and I've read all that. I've read how, the Kokuryukai, which is vernacularly known as the Black Dragon Society, but really referred to the Black Dragon River, the Amur River. But they helped Sun Yat-sen. They helped Chandra Bose. They helped independence movements throughout Asia. If you were for the Asians, why did you facilitate the genocide in Asia? Why, when the people said, we don't want to follow Japan, did you slaughter so many people?
Right.
Okay? And this idealist said, and he was an idealist, this is what he said. He said, do you know when you love a woman and you give her everything, you open your heart, you would sell every possession for her. All you want to do is make love to her. And she rejects you. What are you going to do? And so when you become, the scary thing about idealists is when you believe your ideal is virtuous, then anybody who rejects your ideal is evil. And anything is justified. And this has nothing to do with my particular politics and who I voted for. But when I watch film clips of people doing something as, in quotes, trivial as keying Teslas, and I see the particular suppressed hatred and ecstasy on their face, I say, wow, it's so easy to become a lynch mob. Because it's the same face you saw on people standing around a lynched corpse of an African American that you see in the faces of people harassing Jews in Germany pre-World War II. That sort of smug satisfaction of being able to express your most horrible desires and be virtuous doing it. So who was more dangerous in Japan? The idealists who truly did have good motives but were willing to assassinate, or the cold utilitarian corporate fascists, right? So Ueshiba definitely was flirted with those kind of people throughout his life. He, the assassin of the Prime Minister of Japan, Inukai, was a man named Mikami Taku. And Ueshiba,
so just to reiterate, the Prime Minister of Japan was assassinated?
Yeah, in 1932. There was a wave of assassinations. There were these groups, the Ketsumedan, the Blood Brotherhood, which was led by a Buddhist priest, trained them in how to kill people. They're all
that was Zen. That was Zen Buddhism, right? Is that where Zen
no, he
Buddhism
was Nichiren. He was Nichiren Buddhist. Although, there's again, Zen at War, which is a remarkable book. Pretty much every prominent Zen priest fully supported Japanese war aims. And among other things, they gave sermons that, look, you as a soldier, if you have to bayonet a baby, the emperor has the Buddha nature, and this is the emperor's will. And so you are helping that baby onto a better karma. don't hold.
Wow.
So
That's crazy.
It's
so, but this is just my plebeian peon take about O Sensei is like his idealism lie in like his wanting to live in an agrarian society and practice martial arts.
Okay. So it's kind of funny.
Like he was just trying to like build his own farmland and that just seemed like what his aim was. And I think maybe he got caught up in being so like powerful and magnetic of a personality that he got caught up in all that stuff. Like where was he supposed to go? What were you supposed to do?
There is a question. If you are part of a zeitgeist, spirit of the age, it is hard to step out of it, right? It's hard to be totally a part of it. The idealistic right wing believed in what they called Genshi Kosanto, which meant a primordial communism. And they idealized a return to an agrarian life where life was simple and the corrupt industrialists no longer tampered with people's lives. And we would be in a paradise under the aegis of the emperor. Okay. So some of the most significant of the terrorist movements were agrarian idealists. Okay. Now, again, give me like maybe 5-6 more minutes on this. So Ueshiba, like many people, shifted from left to right. It wasn't a simple, the right people believe in factories with ant-like workers and the left believes in, it's not like that. Right. Benito Mussolini was a socialist before he was a fascist. This left-right dichotomy is absurd.
I agree with you. I don't buy into it. I'm just trying to. We have to use that vocabulary because that's what we're talking about.
So you had Ueshiba. So Takeda Sokaku was Ueshiba's teacher. Was, as far as anybody can tell, non-political. I mean, I'm sure he didn't oppose the government, but he didn't figure in any of that. He was a martial artist who taught people. And he primarily wanted to. I don't think he was ever teaching the Communist Youth League. He was teaching policemen, judges, and all of that. He was part of the establishment, so to speak. But he wasn't a political figure. Deguchi.
Just in case people don't know, Sokaku Takeda was Daito Ryu O Sensei's teacher.
That's correct. Yeah, he was, Ueshiba's main teacher. And Ueshiba, for most of his life, it is fair to say, on a technical basis, almost everything he did was Daito-ryu. It was his personal expression of Daito-ryu. And
I'm going to put a link. I'm putting links to your book so people can read all about him.
Okay.
You write about him in length.
A lot of detail. So the thing is, if Ueshiba had chosen to continue to call what he did Daito-ryu, nobody would have raised an eyebrow except to say, well, my Daito-ryu is better than yours. Right? But because his thinking changed, it's fair to say a martial art is just not what you do with your limbs. It is what you do with your mind and what your focus is. People have these silly debates. Well, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is just judo. No, it's not. Not anymore. Right? It's there's such overlap, and no, it's not. Right? So anyway, so you have Deguchi, who is this just remarkable, not only God intoxicated, but intoxicated with his fine self guy, who was one of those people who, once he became a religious leader, one of the things he realized is he could play with people, and almost for his own amusement. And the sort of stories about him scaring the maids by getting himself erect and poking through the shoji screen or something like that. On a trivial level, he was doing that on a national level, and he was messing around with big forces. He sort of flirted with the concept that he was really destined to be the emperor. He would ride a white horse, which was, reserved for the emperor, things like that. He was messing around, but also, well, let's see what happens. The Omotokyo was a movement which was sweeping Japan. There were millions of people doing Omotokyo. Ueshiba became part of that. And Deguchi made very deep associations with some of the most significant, again, in these quotes, because it's such a different phenomenon, right-wing figures. In particular, Toyama Mitsuru, who was the godfather of that whole movement, who founded the Dark Ocean Society, which was, it's almost like these societies were similar to Al-Qaeda, but much closer to the government at the same time. And so Deguchi is flirting with these people. And so was Ueshiba then as Deguchi's pet bear, one way to think of him. But he also believed that stuff because Ueshiba did, the Kobukan Dojo was a meeting place for the Sakurakai, which is a military organization of young revolutionary military guys.
The Kobukan Dojo was his dojo at the Ayabe, the
no, this is in Tokyo, but that was
okay.
So some of the most famous
Kobukan was the Hell Dojo?
Yeah, except nobody ever got injured there, which is interesting.
But that was later, right? That was way after, that was like in the 30s?
In the 30s, yeah.
Okay, because he joined up with Omoto in like 1920.
Right, and the thing is, he was a member of Omoto till the day he died.
Okay.
There was reasons why he was at a distance, which again we could talk all day, but he never quit. There was resentment because when the Japanese government in 1936 decided to destroy Omoto, Ueshiba was protected, and so some people thought he was a Judas. Deguchi, as far as anybody knows, did not. Deguchi basically said, "This is your destiny." And, in the larger sense, Omotokyo's mission is supported by Ueshiba not being in prison. So, at any rate, even after the war, Ueshiba maintained very deep contacts with some of these very significant figures. As I said, so he was hiding out. The assassin of Inukai, who was continued to be a political activist. After World War II, the Americans were hunting for him, and Ueshiba hid him out in Iwama. And Tsunano Mari Sensei, one of the great Shihan of Aikido, when he was a small, dapper, dark-haired man who taught in Kyushu, had a very soft style of Aikido. And he was visiting O-Sensei at Iwama, and O-Sensei said, "Let me introduce you to this great man." And he introduced Tsunano to this terrorist. Oh. So, again, and then what I think is stupid is to say, oh, therefore, he was a supporter of, and fully on board. He was a terrorist himself. He was a murderer. No, he wasn't. But he was. There has always been a concept in the Japanese ruling class that violence is a tool of the state and not something to be ashamed of. So, this.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that? Violence is a tool of the state
and not something to be ashamed of.
And do you think that doesn't only apply to the Japanese ruling? Did you?
No, of course not.
Because I feel like that's still applicable to every nation on earth right now.
But what's different is that when the Prime Minister of Japan was assassinated, millions of Japanese supported the assassins. Young schoolgirls were cutting off their piece of their little finger and sending it into the court, saying, "Release these men."
Wow.
The similar phenomena which we're seeing in America right now is this guy Mangione or whatever his name is, who that's very similar. The blood of the oppressor purifies, kind of thing. Well, this was truly the worldview in Japan, and so these assassins were given very brief prison sentences, almost every one of them, because of their, quote, sincerity. I can't remember the Japanese word for sincerity, but it meant this. They meant good by doing what they were doing, and therefore It wasn't merely a crime. So Ueshiba was certainly susceptible to that, or he wouldn't have, found these people congenial. At the same time, back to your question, yes, he, like many people, believed in this back to the land thing, and he didn't create Iwama and start farming to create a reservoir of terrorists or something like that.
Right.
He was isolating for his own training. So this whole other aspect of Ueshiba, because none of us are just one thing, is that he was also a man who was trying to use his martial arts training as a vehicle to create himself as the person he wanted to be. And in a sense, Aikido for him was a metaphor of his own creation, a physical metaphor of his own creation. And I don't mean a creation of Aikido, a creation of him, Ueshiba, as somebody who had something unique to offer people. And the way I often think about the way Ueshiba did his martial arts he was writing scripture with people's bodies. So, when you attack him in a very symbolic way, in a way, it's using your hand as if it's a sword. It's not like boxing, right? And then he does some throw where he releases and the person flies. He's trying to show universal principles, which he believes are universally applicable through the interaction of bodies.
So he's acting out like a sacred geometry, kind of.
Yes, I very much believe that was what he believed.
Well, he does talk about like triangles and circles and squares and
yeah. But even beyond that, the whole concept of takemusa aiki, he talked about that at the same time he talked about himself in various forms as if he was an avatar being, an embodiment of cosmic forces participating in the creation of the cosmos, so to speak. So it's not like he's doing takemusa aiki for the most part by, say, getting in an open field and saying, attack me any way you want. We're going to have a fight to the death and the cosmos will be enacted. It's, you will attack me in the way I want because I have a principle I want to teach. It doesn't mean he wasn't, I don't mean by that he wasn't a great martial artist and highly skilled or anything like that. But it's also mistaken to say, oh, he just wanted a controlled environment so he could look good doing throws. I don't see that at all. I think this was surpassingly important to him. And he was teaching through embodiment of principle, and other people who participated with him helped him in that process.
So he transformed a martial art into a spiritual practice.
Yes, but.
Right.
Okay, and the reason I say that is Yamada Yoshimitsu Sensei said that when he and the other deshi were young, they would go out drinking and sometimes get in fights. And they would come back to Hombu Dojo, and sometimes they'd be all bruised up or bloodied up or whatever. And O-sensei would, how could you do this? A martial art of peace. You aren't supposed to be fighting in base human desires, blah, 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 blah. And they have their heads down. And then he'd go, well, did you win? And I think this is important, not only because it's the human side, but it's also what some people tend to do is they say martial art or spiritual practice. And when I first got into Aikido, it was the Saint Ueshiba Morihei took the brutal techniques of Daito-ryu, transformed them into spiritual. The actual thing is a lot of Daito-ryu is a lot more gentle and airy-fairy than a lot of Aikido, right? It's not either or. And so it's both and. It was a spiritual practice, and it was, as far as Ueshiba was concerned, a martial art. And he was concerned that his students could fight.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there have been incidents at the Aikikai Hombu Dojo where people would come in to fight, and there was from other martial arts, and there were one or two guys who were always designated, you handle the challenge. Kato Hiroshi, Chibakazo, Shibata Ichiro. And basically somebody would come in and say, come on up to the fourth floor. And then they'd get beat up. There were always people who were responsible for that. So it wasn't like, oh, no. I don't know about now, but there wasn't the, oh, no, we're a peaceful martial art. We don't do that harmony. Oh, you want to take our signpost? You want to beat up our people? Come on up to the fourth floor.
Mm. Yeah, when I made that statement, I didn't mean he eliminated the martial side of it. I was just trying to like encapsulate what you said, that he was, through his demonstration of the techniques he was showing, he was trying to show spiritual principles or spiritual like axioms, maybe, like, because
that's the way I see it. And
spiral like motions, like movements, like maybe.
Well, it's more than that. So
and I wanted to talk about misogi too at some point.
In 1 minute. How about that?
Okay.
So there's a concept from Chinese philosophy, heaven, earth, and man. And it imbued a lot of Japanese martial arts as well. So Tenjin Shinryu, ten, heaven, Jin, earth, right? So those concepts are very important. Now, the classical Chinese concept was that man in the middle is a microcosm of heaven and earth, which then, basically, when you understand Chinese medicine, you're understanding the cosmos, so to speak. What Ueshiba specifically did is he made man a third ordinal force, a third equal force to heaven and earth. And that the purpose of humanity was this, that in his view, heaven and earth, for whatever reasons, had fallen out of harmony, out of sync. Among other things, the emperor was not in the proper place, all that. The purpose of the avatars, like himself, like Deguchi, like any one of a number of other spiritual teachers, was to act in such a way that through their spiritual power, the whole universe would be put in order again. So there's something incredibly grandiose about this, but it's also really significant in understanding him. In a sense, that aspect of Ueshiba was he was staking his existence on the survival of the cosmos.
And you said this was his own, like, this is his theology. Like, he got this from all of his experiences. This was what, like, the culmination of his spiritual, like, realization. It's not like he inherited this doctrine from this place or that place. This is his own kind of idea, right?
I don't know enough about Omotokyo to know if Deguchi spoke equally about that. It's obviously derived from Ueshiba's contact with Omotokyo because Deguchi himself was an avatar in that frame. But this particular language of heaven, earth, man, with man in the middle, as he says, it's Ueshiba's sort of grafting of Chinese philosophical principles on Shinto, where the interaction of the gods are metaphors for the way the cosmos works. And it's on one level, it's not grandiose in the way it would be in the West. If I start walking around saying I'm Jesus Christ, that's apostasy. Just to see, right? But to realize that you not are kami, have kami is you, moves through you, is not alien to classical Shinto thought. Many people after death, if they are sufficiently meritorious, are enshrined as kami. They become a deity. But again, it's not like the old Greek concept of Zeus picking a mortal up, putting him in the sky, and making them a constellation. It's
But the Greeks had an animism too.
Yeah.
They had like Thales was the first philosopher, and he said all things are full of gods.
Yeah.
And Empedocles was a god, like said he was a god. There was
Fair enough. Yeah.
I think well, I don't even have to get into that. But I think that's something that when we take God or the gods out of existence and put them into like in the conceptual realm, then we're uncomfortable with those kind of things, right? Like,
yeah.
But I mean, Jesus said he was Jesus. Like that's like somebody said they were Jesus and got away with it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
you wanted to ask me about Shinkon Kishin, Misogi, and all the rest, yeah?
Shinkon Kishin, right. So almost everybody that practices Aikido and has looked into it a little bit knows the story of when O-sensei's father was sick and he took the train from Hokkaido back to his hometown. And on the way there, he decided to get off the train because he heard of Omoto and Taguchi. They were in Ayabe, right? That's the name of that's the center of Omoto at the time, right? Ayabe. So I knew that story for a long time, and so I have in my hands the book, the biography of O-sensei by Kishimoto Ueshiba, A Life in Aikido. And in that book, there's like 2 pages that kind of cover that story. And one of the things, so he gets off the train and he goes and sits and does some prayers for his father and meets with Taguchi personally. And Taguchi tells him, like, you don't worry about your father, like, that kind of thing. Like, his spirit is in the natural course of things. And then it says that O-sensei stayed with him for 3 days and practiced Shinkon Kishin, right? And all the times I read that before, I just glanced over it. And what I thought of Shinkon Kishin was, I was kind of correlating it to the exercises we do before class sometimes, like the rowing exercise, the shaking the ball, the coordinated breathing, like pulling the breath down from the earth back up, and that was kind of what I thought Shinkon Kishin was. Pretty much just like a meditation with breath, like coordinated with breath. And then I started looking into it, and at the time that O-sensei went to, that was in 1920, right? 1919.
Something like that, yeah.
The Shinkon Kishin, what they were calling Shinkon Kishin, was basically mediated spirit possession.
Exactly.
Like they would meditate to the point where they would be go into a trance, and then there would be some of them, not everyone, would exhibit of like being possessed by a spirit, and they had these mediators called saniwa that would basically interrogate the deity to see who it was and ask it questions, and they would determine whether it was like just like a fox or a badger, or if it was an actual god. And so when O-sensei, what made O-sensei decide to stay and go back to Omoto after was those 3 days of practicing this intense, like, spirit possession kind of. That's crazy to me. But in your book, you talk about how, and you also mentioned this to me personally through email, that O-sensei also studied with the Misogi. I forgot what they were called, and Misogi Kai.
Yeah.
And that was where he kind of developed the Shinkon Kishin that we do as warm-ups.
Not exactly. You're close, but not exactly. Okay, so the Neo-Shinto movements were really into this the mediated spirit possession. So the way to think of it isn't that you begin meditating and then the Saniwa appears and says, "Hey, come on out, spirit." The Saniwa sets the whole thing up. It's very similar to getting on stage and the hypnotist says, "Watch my fingers, cluck like a chicken," right?
Oh yeah, they played a stone flute. They had
Right.
like a special instrument.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of different neo-Shinto organizations were doing stuff like this, and it's we've had phenomena like that. What was it called? There was this claim for a while of something called, I believe it was facilitated communication, which was allegedly these facilitators were putting their hand on that of a nonverbal autistic individual, and they would be writing, and and the truth was, and it was like, oh my God, they've been thinking all the time. They wanted to say these things and all that. And it turned out it was unconsciously. It wasn't malevolent, but unconsciously, it was the facilitator who was moving the hand, like a Ouija board almost.
I was going to say like a Ouija board.
So in that time, all over the world, there was this kind of, wow, we could have a conduit to the spirits directly. And people were messing around with sort of unconscious responses. The Chinkon Kishin was one example of that. The government was really threatened by it, and it more or less.
It got out of control. There was because it was very effective. Like there was people would go and they would get possessed, and it was getting wild. Like,
right, and the thing was, they get possessed, and guess what they're going to do now? They're going to join the club, and Omotokyo is becoming the huge amounts of money, newspaper.
They bought their own newspapers.
Right. They had their own film studio. It just incredible the amount of power they accrued in a short period of time. It was very dangerous from the government's perspective. So, but Chinkon Kishin is, and still exists today, it is, generally speaking, mediated spirit possession. Now, there's O-sensei, previous to involvement in Shinto, he had studied esoteric Buddhism, Shingon Buddhism, which I don't know if it's an accident that the two things sound the same, or it was back in 100, 200 years before, it was co-opted. And there are Shingon Mikyo rituals where through your own meditation, often with what they call an uke, you bring forth an entity. Mikyo is the same Buddhism that they practice in Tibet. The same sutra. Okay? And the difference was the Buddhist practice is you bring forth an entity so real it talks to you and moves things on the table, and then you see through the unreality of it and you realize the universe is all mind. It's a practice to appreciate a Buddhist principle that all is created through mind. The Shinto practice is, no, this is real. It is a god or it is a lower spirit. Okay? Ueshiba believed the latter. So, Ueshiba had this dilemma, as many people do in similar circumstances, that when you have a powerful, charismatic teacher, some people are happy to be an acolyte to that teacher for the rest of their life. I mean, to me, one of the most beautiful examples of that is Tomiki Kenji, the famous Aikido teacher, Tomiki Sensei. And Oba Hideo was his disciple for 50 years. And Oba was a humble man and never said, "What about me?" Right? He was the perfect disciple. And as far as anybody can tell, had no ego cravings of that kind. Ueshiba was the kind of human being who's like, what about me? Now, he had a dilemma that he had two teachers who did not like each other, who were very different. Now, by the way, what most people don't know is Takeda Sokaku was very much a Shingon Buddhist practitioner. And
okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
He did a lot of rites himself. Now, how much of that he taught Ueshiba or that was his own, there's no information that I've seen published anywhere that explains that. But he wasn't just a mundane guy who just wanted to do wristy twisties. So he's got Takeda, who from a traditional Japanese standpoint, until I set you free, you're my student. That's it. He's got Deguchi, who, on a much bigger sense, Ueshiba owed his new worldview to. He had all these obligations to, you know.
And he owed a lot of his success to him too, because he like gave him land to open a dojo, right? Like pretty much.
Well, there's that, but more than that, it's through Deguchi that Ueshiba started meeting the highest members of Japanese society.
Right.
And see, one of the reasons for that was this. It was legally forbidden for military people to discuss politics.
Right.
That was a crime. But if you joined a religious movement, military men from all over the country could hang out together and discuss things in the context of it being spiritual talk. What is happening to Japan today? And so admirals and generals were joining Omotokyo. Surely some or most of them were believers, but it was also a vehicle for them to take your pick, conspire, discuss, whatever. And through that, Ueshiba all of a sudden moved to the top. He was sponsored by these very prominent people. He's teaching members of the imperial family, for goodness sake. All right? So there's this tremendous weight, a tremendous debt. Now, nobody has been able to assert what solo training methods for development that Takeda Sokaku did, except there's one mention in an interview in the Aikido Journal book of Daitoju Masters that this guy observed Takeda like doing all these wrist exercises. But there's no organized corpus that we know of. It might have existed, but we don't know exactly what he did, at least not publicly. Maybe some of the Daitoju people are keeping it to themselves. Different Daitoju groups had solo training exercises. Ueshiba, for various reasons, wanted to be independent of Omotokyo. He had to after 36 because it was an outlawed movement. But if he's going to be an avatar in his own right, he has to have his own system of training, which people can't just say, oh, that's Daitoju, or oh, that's Omotokyo. We saw that at Ayabe. So there was a movement called Misogi Kai. And Misogi Kai was created by a guy named Kawatsura Bonji. I think I have it pronounced right. And
yeah, that's what I have written down.
Yeah, and his assertion was that he went deep into the mountains, discovered the primordial beginnings of Shinto, and created a series of exercises which would bring a person to whatever one hopes to be in that context. From what I've been told by people who research Kawatsura, he did a lot of it in his room, reading old books, a lot of them being Chinese books on Taoism and things like that. But some of the exercises are the torifune, or the rowing exercise, ikkyo undo. These are movements that you can see in Shinto practice. They go back thousands of years. And there was a list of 8 exercises, and I'm drawing a terrible blank. Futaki Kenzo, that's it. So Futaki Kenzo was the third generation after Kawatsura. I don't know if Kawatsura or the next guy were alive or dead, but he was a very well-known physician. If you look him up on Wikipedia, you'll find he was a pretty prominent guy. He started training in Aikido. The Deshi used to complain that he would show up early in the morning and throw them around. And it wasn't that he was great, he was just this prominent guy. And so he was doing the Misogi exercises, the set of 8 exercises. One of them, in the original form, was called Chinkon Kishin.
Right.
As far as anybody's able to explain what I've seen so far, is it wasn't mediated spiritual possession, but it was, in a sense, intense guided imagery, self-guided imagery. So, which is really messing around, because
Right.
If you put yourself in a trance and start really doing heavy-duty guided imagery, and you have, in a sense, a frail psyche, you could easily make yourself go crazy. So one of the 8 exercises in the set was this Chinkon Kishin as passed down through the Misogi group. Another one, by the way, was eating brown rice, which allegedly when Ueshiba would visit Abe Sensei, Abe Seiseki, who practiced Misogi exercises, he would eat brown rice when he was with Abe, but he never did anywhere else. But anyway, there are these exercises. And so somewhere along the line, the majority of people who practice this changed to doing, what was it called? Bunkong Toyitsu, I believe. Anyway, it was an emptiness meditation, more similar to something you'd see in Zazen. Or I don't know the details, so I don't know if it's counting the breath or, looking at a point on the wall. But it was basically a non-imagery, they're not going for possession, they're going for a quiet mind.
Gotcha.
So what this gave Ueshiba a chance to do is to practice, to encase his training of what I was referred to as internal strength training, particularly coordinated use of the body, within a set of exercises that did not owe anything to Omotokyo or Daitoju. So in a sense, it's same wine in new bottle.
Right.
Interestingly, just yesterday, I started working with an old friend who's really an expert at different Chinese martial arts, and I asked him to teach me push hands from the perspective that he learned from some really remarkable teachers. And I was having some trouble with a particular way of grounding the body. And he showed me an exercise which I'd been taught once before, which was really Ikkyo Undo. But there's some very specific instructions on how you push off into the ground, how you use your legs to ground so that your whole body pushes. So you could do Ikkyo Undo forever, and it would be nothing. You might get your knees a little stronger. But the one dilemma with Ueshiba was he followed the steal the technique method of teaching, which is if the student is truly sincere, they observe in a way that, in modern terms, their mirror neurons fire and they learn without having it explained. This is the way most Japanese knowledge was taught until modern times. Perhaps the oldest dance form extant in the world today is the Japanese court dances, bugaku. They go back through the Silk Road, 1,000, 1,500 years.
Yeah, I was reading your book where you write about it, and I went on YouTube and watched some videos. They're cool. It's really cool looking.
Amazing, isn't it?
The masks, they got like real like scary dragon masks. And
it looks so much like, Tai Chi merged with No, right? And I, as you read in the book, but I contacted an authority and I said, did they explicitly teach how to use your body? And the person said, no. You learn by osmosis. It's, she mentioned there's one modern No teacher who's begun to put out videotapes explicitly teaching some principles and commercializing it. But for 1,000 years or more, it's been learned by osmosis. And O-sensei expected people to learn that way.
What was the story you told about the sumo wrestler who watched the dance, and that was how his jujitsu Daito Ryu was developed? Is something like that?
So
sorry,
not exactly. There's a story that is truly, absolutely not so. But
it's not sure, right?
Yeah, but the primordial legend of Daito-ryu is I can't remember his name.
Minamoto no Yoshimitsu.
Right. So he was of the nobility. He did sumo, and so he watched the classical dance and allegedly discovered Daito-ryu. And the proof of that is he lived in the Daito mansion. What makes this story so silly is when Takeda Sokaku was teaching his martial art, he called it Yamato-ryu, which is the character's Daito can be said Yamato. And so Yoshida Kotaro, who was, among other things, a literate man and a newspaperman, said, no, Sensei, that would be read Daito.
So he wasn't even calling it. He wasn't calling it Daito-ryu at first.
No. It's almost, I'm going to say 99.9% sure that Daito-ryu, as one knows it, was created by Takeda Sokaku. He studied other things. I had one theory in my book. There's some other theories that have come up. There's a theory that has come up that his first wife's father was a jiu-jitsu teacher. And Takeda was a specialist with a sword, and that so this theory goes, he learned jiu-jitsu and maybe Shingon as well from his father-in-law. But at any rate, that story is not true, but it does make a kind of elegant sense. But all Asian martial arts are that way. A wonderful scholar named Michael Reinhardt, who's been studying Shinto-ryu, the oldest still existing sword schools, found a scroll that alleges that Tsukahara Bokuden, famous swordsman of the period, developed a kempo system, a fist-fighting system, by watching deer in rut spar with their antlers. Oh. And these kind of stories are everywhere, right? So they make symbolic sense. Because I'm sure that if one were to see that system, which no longer exists, that the people kind of looked like deer, right? Just like Mantis Kung Fu kind of looks like Mantis or whatever, right?
Well, it's not out of the realm of possibility to me that you could learn a lot. I mean, they say Jigoro Kano learned a lot of judo movements from his cat, right? From dropping his cat over and over again. When I practiced judo for 2 years, and my teacher told me that. I don't know if it's true or not. But
I never heard it, but why not? Yeah.
I taught my cat how to do backflips, right? We're using like one of those strings with a feather on a pole.
Yeah.
And like you run, I was making him run on the bed back and forth, and I started looping it backwards, and he started doing backflips, right? So I feel like I learned a lot for ukemi from my cat, definitely.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you just a little bit of a technical Aikido kind of thing. In your book, one of my favorite passages in the book was when you start talking about kasutori.
Kasutori.
Kasutori, right. And your explanation of ukemi from that perspective was like, I spent almost a year as Uchideshi once at New York Aikikai. And that feeling of my body being, my joints being softened.
Yeah.
Right. And it reset my whole body basically. So I understand, I understood what you were talking about viscerally, but I want to kind of hear your more, I want to hear you talk about it a little bit, if that's okay.
So that quote comes from Tsunado Mari Sensei, who was one of O-Sensei's remarkable descendants.
I have his book, that's Enlightenment Through Aikido, right?
Very much in the spiritual area. His brother was a big dog in Omotokyo. So he's very much connected to Omotokyo. His sister taught Terry Dobson how to do a Koshinage. She was, all three were in their own way prominent in that world. So Tsunamari Sensei was describing there was this remarkable event in 1955 when, Uesha, kind of like the post-war occupation had lifted in that year. And so O-Sensei calls everybody together and taught a week of seminars. And what was interesting is different people got different things out of the seminar. Kuruya Sensei was like, yeah, he talked a lot and taught Ikkyo. Right? Sure. He was a downtown boy, very practical. Tsunamari Sensei described how he had a conversation with Ueshiba where he said that Aikido is kasudori, which is straining out the lees of sake, the sediment in sake. and you get the sediment out of your joints. So there are a couple levels to this. The first level, and when I was training at the Aikikai, I was a very popular guy for teachers to call out for ukemi. 6'6". I was pretty slender in those days, but nonetheless, I was a big guy, and it was pretty cool for somebody 5'6" to throw me, right? And I was a very, very responsive uke. I didn't give them resistance. I was able to say, "Oh, I know where he wants to go with this," and I wouldn't anticipate too far, but I was there, right?
But and you stay within the technique, right? You're not like jumping out of the technique.
Right. So the first level, which is, I think, an unfortunate level, which is where most Aikido people stop, is to be responsive to the other person. It does teach you how to relax. You know, the folks in the new Russian martial art Sistema really play with that. Kuroda Tetsuzan, the famous swordsman who presented at Stanley Prannon's Aiki Expos, his jujitsu was the same way. His theory was, if somebody has a weapon and is trying to stab you, any area of your body you stiffen locks you in place and you won't be able to avoid. So it was a jujitsu of avoidance on a blade. So there is something to that. The problem that can develop, though, is you get what I call Aiki accommodation syndrome, which is when the person puts pressure on you, you yield. So the next level of Kasudori is a neutral body, which is you don't resist, but you don't accommodate. And, you know, what happens then, the difference is if you shove in my shoulder and I do the first level, I open up my shoulder and then you throw me. The next level is you shove, and if I'm well balanced, and if we had another conversation on the whole concept of what eternal strength is and all that stuff, what Ueshiba himself was doing. If I'm well grounded and your push is not strong enough, I'm not moving and I'm not resisting. I'm not pushing back. But if it goes stronger, my joint is not tight, which would interfere with that force to flow down into the ground, so to speak, right? And if in that sense I'm balanced, and so now I can do kaishiwaza, right? So the first level, you can't really do kaishiwaza because you're working with the teacher to accomplish the teacher's picture that he's drawing in the air with your body.
Right.
The second level is the two of you are each other's uke. And this is, I think, where it's necessary. If Aikido is going to advance, that principle would be wonderful to advance, where you are simultaneously Nage and Uke, but not in some grotesque tug-of-war, that you're maintaining Aikido form powerfully, not a dance, not contact improvisation, powerfully, where the two of you are recognizing at the moment of pressure, at the moment of attack, not resisting, right? Your joints stay open, but you're well grounded and well rooted so that you can not only absorb the force, you can give force back to the person. And to me, when I hear what Tsunamari's talking about, what I've been told, I never met him. I met some of his students. What I've been told is Tsunamari himself could do that. It wasn't just a matter of flip-flopping, like being a dish rag. Whereas his students seem to be flip-floppers to me, that they just would yield. Right? So that's what Kasudori is to me. That opening of the joints is not for the purpose of being the other person's ragdoll.
Right.
It is for the purpose of being able to not give your opponent any levers, any fixed points that they can work against you.
Right.
And that's where the Daitoru people talk about transparent power, tome no chikara, right? And they used to say there's about Ueshiba, that you would push into him and you couldn't feel him. And that wasn't some mystical thing. That was his ability to adjust his body with his open joints so that there was no fixed point that you could push on and feel him. And you asked me, why did I sort of quit Aikido? Because what you're talking about was something I didn't experience from any of the teachers I work with. And then I had my hands on some of the most marvelous teachers at the time. And I became re-interested in Aikido, not as in the sense of daily going to an Aikido dojo, but studying those principles in every martial art I was doing. When I got turned on to not just the concept of internal strength, but started working with people to various degrees of depth who were able to manifest exactly what you're talking about.
I have something a little bit ridiculous. Years and years ago, I read an article in like a science magazine about a woman who was studying why chimpanzees are so much stronger than humans, right? And her theory was that because and I'm just going to put it in like layman's terms, their neurological system didn't exert as much control over the rest of them, right? So like as humans, what we do is like we're trained from a young age to hold a pencil, or tie our shoes, or do things that require like such minute control over our bones and muscles that we're losing that explosive power, right? That I'm not saying it's true, but I took it as true at the time, and I started doing like workout, like changing the way I worked out to like imagining I was more like a chimp, and I feel like it has like opened me up, in terms of.
Well, there's a couple points there that are interesting points. Number one, there's a reflex that newborn babies have called the palmar reflex. If the baby grabs your finger and you're going, wow, and you actually pull your hand away and the baby's sort of hanging on, it's a reflex. It disappears in humans at about 6 months of age. With chimps, it doesn't disappear. And that's why a chimp who weighs 200 pounds can literally swing by gripping a limb and be absolutely relaxed. That's the palmar reflex. And it's my theory, and I have some experience with it, that we can recover some degree of the palmar reflex through training. There's a guy I just met in Australia, Jim Armstrong, great name, and he sort of independently has been sort of researching this stuff, and it's remarkable the grip he has when he uses his hands as opposed to when he uses his whole body. His hand alone grip is far stronger. And he's, as best I can tell, he's activating that reflex. The Japanese sword concept of shiboru, which most people think, ringing, and they ring the sword like a dish rag, which is, I'll be polite, unwise, because you're locking the joints. That true shiboru is a ringing of the body with the joints open. It's almost like taking up the slack of the flesh of your palms. That's the palmar reflex. So that's one aspect of this, the non-localized power that chimpanzees have naturally. The other aspect is something that we hear of people going berserk. And people have untapped levels of power that we are inhibited from using because our joints and tendon attachments couldn't survive it. So, you hear these apocryphal stories. It's funny, when I first started Aikido, what I first read was that you will tap into the power of like the grandma who picks the car off the grandson's body when the jack slips. And that's right. And I was like, when am I going to get that? What they never talk about is grandma was hospitalized with 3 fractures of the lumbar vertebrae afterwards.
All right, that's true, right.
The frame, we have that access to power, but we have inhibitors to keep us from using it unless our life is on the line. So that is berserker strength. And we think of the berserker as somebody in a delirium state, but classically speaking, the berserker was in a cold, predatory state. When you actually read the Viking saga and all that, it's sort of like what the Irish called the warp spasm. It's like going into this kind of other realm where you see everything clearly and your emotions are not involved and nothing holds you back. Now, a lot of the training that people might do, including keeping the joints open, but at the same time strengthening the tendons, et cetera, is to create a frame that can sustain the forces when you release them.